Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to be painting this fishing boat and gulls in a sort of early evening sky with a little bit of a sunset glow to it. I'm using Millford cold pressed paper. It's taped to my board with ordinary decorator's masking tape, and I've got a strip of masking tape across the horizon line for a nice clean join between the sky and the sea on the horizon line. My board's at an angle of 45 degrees so that gravity will help me paint. This is my large Ron Ranson Pro Art Harkey brush, and I'm wetting the sky area, and I'm going to paint the sky first. This is raw sienna. I'm wetting it up a bit with my brush, and I'm going to start to introduce the sunset glow. Just bringing it across near the base of the horizon and then into some Venetian red. Be careful with this, it's a very strong colour, as you can see. Just the smallest amount will give you a lot of deep reddy orange pigmentation, but it comes to quite a nice sort of pinkish, softest salmony colour with plenty of water, which is what I'm looking for. And mixing it in with the raw sienna gives me this sunset glow. Now for a nice clear sky with just a little bit of fading light in it, I'm using Cotman Intense Blue, which is a phthalo blue, mixing it with plenty of water so it's not too strong, but because I'm painting wet in wet onto wet paper, it will gently diffuse and soften. And of course, watercolour always dries about 30% lighter. So I'm just brushing it on. You can see gravity helping the paint to run down the page and to gently diffuse into the other colours. Now I'm mixing more of this Venetian red. You can use light red if you haven't got Venetian red, across the sky, and this is mixing and blending wet in wet on the page with the intense blue and giving me some lovely sort of gentle cloud shadows which will soften and diffuse back even more as it dries. And then using a clean damp Harkey brush, I can run it through the paint that's already on the page very gently, just using the tips of the brush, feathering the paint through, moving it about a little bit. And I can clean it out, dry it off again so it's just damp, and I can use it to sort of lift a little bit of the cloud out while everything's still wet and while there's still a sheen on the paper. So I'm going almost back to the white paper here to get just a little faint bit of light cloud in the distance. I don't want quite as much as that, so I'm making sure the edges are nice and soft, and because my board's at 45 degrees, the wet paint is still gradually drifting downwards and will soften off those edges as it dries. This is my 3/4 inch flat brush, and I'm introducing a little bit of blue closer to the horizon. I'm going over the tape and pulling it through, and as I pull the brush through the clouds and the colours, I'm sort of colour mixing, feathering and lifting at the same time, but very lightly with the tips of the brush. So be careful not to overdo this, but it's really nice because it can give us those the impression of those much smaller, wispier clouds in the really far off distance. So now I'm going to remove my tape carefully, and you can see I've got a lovely clean horizon line. And now I'm going to, using the same colours that are still on my brush, and if you get any drips of water or paint on the sides, just wipe them off quickly so that you don't get them running into your painting. I'm going to use the same colours that are already on my brush, my large Pro Art Harkey brush, and I'm going to sweep it along, leaving a little bit of a gap between the sea and the sky, so I get that little light edge of differentiation, and that's a really nice effect. And then I'll draw the brush across the sea, creating similar colours to what there is in the sky reflected in the sea. I'm trying to leave some gaps between the brush strokes, so there's some unpainted paper, which gives me that kind of light sparkle. And if I get some dry brush, then that's even better. And I can go in with my flat brush and sort of feather through again. I can lift out if the brush is clean and dry, clean and damp. I can lift out a few light lines while the paint's wet, but I can also do this when the paint is dry. So if you feel that when your sea has dried, that there's not quite enough sparkle or light areas in it, then you can use a wet brush and lift out a few lines, because Milford's a really good paper for lifting. Putting in some raw sienna across the left foreground to strengthen up the glow in the water. And I'm almost ready to paint my fishing boat. I need to now leave it to dry completely. Now here it is, completely dry, and you can see that I've penciled in the shape of my fishing boat. Now this is from my imagination, because I paint boats all the time in my personal paintings. So you can either pause the video here and copy the outline that I've painted, and that's all we're looking for is the outline, or you can find a reference photograph on a royalty-free site and use that and create your own sort of boat silhouette. And that's what I'm going for today, a sort of a silhouette with just some slight differentiation of tonal values in the boat to suggest everything that's going on, the hull, the cabin, and all the paraphernalia on deck, the masts and aerials, and a fisherman at the back. And so I'm just really colouring in, so to speak, the hull with a mixture of my three colours that I've used already. So intense blue, raw sienna and light red mixed together to make this lovely dark neutral grey, and it's in harmony with the sky and the sea colours because it's the same colours but just mixed together a little bit more strongly. And then with my 3/4 inch flat brush, I'm filling in the hull and the cabin, just carefully, leaving plenty of that sea colour showing through in gaps where the cabin is, because that will suggest the glass windows in the cabin and things like that. Now this is quite easy for beginners, I think, to play around with things in silhouette, because you end up with a very effective painting, but it's actually not too difficult once you get your boat shape accurate. Then it's just more or less filling it all in with your rich neutral grey, and then using a fine brush for a few of the details like these masts or aerials or whatever they are. And just the tips of the brush to put in a little sweep of rigging, a few dots and dashes here and there. I mean, what we're doing really is creating the illusion of a boat here. So try not to get bogged down with detail or worrying about certain areas. Like, for example, I know that my cabin isn't right, but I can adjust that later on. I also know that the curves front and back or fore and aft of my hull aren't quite right, but I can make adjustments as I go along. I'm working on the general suggestion of this boat, and as I paint more and more of it and it begins to come together, then I can make those small adjustments to the cabin and the hull and anywhere else that I want to actually bring the painting together. But I'm not obsessing about that at the moment, and I think it's important for beginners to think in terms of the bigger picture, so to speak, if you'll pardon the phrase. When you're painting something like a boat, think of the overall shape and don't get bogged down with tiny bits of the detail. You can make those adjustments as you go along when you're painting in silhouette like this. which is why a sort of simple sunset scene like this and a silhouetted boat is such a lovely scene for a beginner to paint, because a silhouette is quite forgiving. You can keep working on it and building up the shape, just making slight adjustments here and there until it looks more convincing. And then, of course, one of the most important things is using the flat brush is to bring down some shadow and some sort of reflections. So just really darkening up the ripples on the water, getting a bit of movement there, sort of showing how the shape of the boat is just lightly reflected in the calm, still water. Horizontal strokes, using that same dark colour, being careful to make sure you don't go over all of the sea colours. We want lots of that between those darker marks in order to create this watery effect. And then with the small calligraphy brush, I'm just going to pull down sort of wiggly vertical lines right down to the tape, more or less following the slight angles of each of those masts. And as we approach the end of the painting, I'm now just trying to bring the boat together and looking at the parts of it that I'm not so keen on. So I'm putting a little rail across the back, and then I'll put some more little something and nothing details into the masts and around the cabin. Maybe a few sort of aerials and those sorts of attachments. Bit more rigging. I don't mind if my lines don't join. It's just suggestions, and sort of sometimes having a wonky line almost looks good. It looks lively and interesting. So try not to get too bogged down with needing to have every rigging line perfect. And then continuing with the something and nothing, just building up the roof and the deck so it looks as if there's things there. Now this is where I'm going to, because my hull is dry now, so I'm using another layer of the same dark colour, and I'm going to darken up the hull, strengthen up the colour towards the back even more, and I think this is just going to differentiate between some of these tones. As it dries, we'll have dark areas and some slightly lighter areas, and that in itself will suggest sort of 3D, three-dimensional look and form to the boat, hopefully. So I'm liking the way it's looking at the moment, but now I just need to correct the hull at the back, and by painting it just a slightly gentler angle down to the water, I think that really improves the shape of the boat a lot. And now I'm going to paint in my fisherman. I'm just indicating him very simply with just a sort of a little shape with a dot for the head, and try to keep that in scale with the rest of the boat as well. And now I'm just going to sort of blend in the shadows with the water a little bit more. So using the flat brush side to side with a little bit of paler grey paint, and sort of pulling paint around here and there. And then I'm going to, with very little paint on the brush, I'm going to sweep the brush in fine lines, horizontal lines, across the water but back behind the boat, if you see what I mean. So we get some sort of just a few faint ripple marks going off and disappearing off into the distance, and then some more of those on the other side. And we're nearly there now. So for the final touch, I'm going to use a fine pointed brush, my small calligraphy brush. I'm going to paint in a flock of gulls, that sort of sight you always see around fishing boats, just gulls waiting for whatever scraps they can scrounge. So I'm being quite sort of rough and ready with these gulls, just a few little ticks and lines and marks, most of them around near the boat, and a few will go up into the sky. Any brush with a good point will do for these. And now the same brush I've dipped into some white gouache, and I'm putting in a few white highlights here and there on the gulls where their wings and bodies are catching the light. And then maybe a few very faint highlights here and there on the boat, but not too much, because I want the fishing boat to be kept mostly in the sort of dark tonal silhouette, with just a hint of shape and form coming through. And I think that's just about enough detail. So here's the finished painting. In real life it's a little bit darker than it looks here because the sun is streaming in through my window and making it look a little bit paler. But I'm really pleased with the way it's turned out. I've got that late afternoon, early evening glow, and the light in the sky is really working well with the silhouette of the fishing boat and the gulls. In real life, the colours look more like this. The phthalo blue, the light red and the raw sienna work together really, really well to give us not only these beautiful transparent light colours in the sky and the sea, but also this dark, beautiful, sort of fairly neutral grey, almost a black, by mixing the three together. So thank you so much for watching. Please leave us a like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thank you so much to my lovely Patreon group who support this channel. And I'll see you again soon, and happy painting. Bye.